1997. A Japanese bullet train slices through the countryside at nearly 300 kilometers an hour. Inside, businessmen sit quietly, reading reports, sipping coffee, pretending to understand spreadsheets. Also, there were a couple of VW executives and the chairman of the VW group at the time, Ferdinand Piëch. And usually when some people are bored, what do? Check mails, doodle stuff. Instead, Ferdinand Piëch started sketching out the layout of a W18 engine on the back of an envelope. Little did he know that this monster would one day evolve into an even bigger monster. A car that redefined the word speed. A car that literally invented the hypercar genre. I'm talking about the automotive Concorde, a 1000 horsepower, 400 km/h machine called the Bugatti Veyron. The Bugatti Veyron is a masterpiece of engineering. It's a car that has almost 1000 horsepower, yet feels every bit as drivable as a Golf GTI. It also can go 400 km/h plus, but it can also drive to the opera in relative comfort. This brief at the time was nearly impossible. However, Volkswagen, well, they weren't the guys to say impossible. For them, impossible was just another difficulty level. It wasn't not possible. This is the story of how a bet, the back of an envelope, and a lot of money changed the car world forever. This is the story of the Bugatti Veyron. Hey guys, my name is Trijal. Welcome back to another episode of the Tyre Smoke podcast. And as you heard, in this episode we're going to be talking about the Bugatti Veyron. It all starts with one man. His name is Ferdinand Piëch. He is technically related to Ferdinand Porsche, who is, if you don't know, basically the founder of the Porsche Motor Company. And Porsches, as we all know, used to use old VW parts. So that's why probably Ferdinand Piëch became the chairman of Volkswagen. But Ferdinand Piëch, I mean there are I think at least 2 or 3 Ferdinand Piëchs, but anyway, this Ferdinand Piëch was also the guy who supervised the Porsche 917 project. Now, if for the uninitiated, the Porsche 917 was the car that made Porsche what it was today. Without the Porsche 917, Porsche would have been bankrupt and you would have never heard of them. However, this car, by winning Le Mans, set their name on a world stage. This Porsche 917 almost had 1000 horsepower in race trim and could do almost 398 kilometers an hour. This fascinated Ferdinand Piëch. He wondered, if a race car can go almost 400 kilometers an hour, what about a road car? He did realize, of course, if you wanted to put almost 1000 horsepower in a road car, it needed to have tires to suit, a gearbox to suit, and at the same time, it didn't have to be like the jarriness of a race car. It needed to be drivable by a normal person. This was a challenge at the time, because at the time cars were still beginning to get horsepower. Okay, like 500 at the time was crazy. Nowadays also it is crazy, but you know what I mean, right? Nobody had really touched 1000 horsepower yet, let alone build a car that also felt drivable despite having 1000 horsepower. When Ferdinand told the engineers to make a car like this, at first he did not ask them whether it was possible. He just gave them a timeline and told them to get to work. So well, they did get to work, and the first prototype of the Bugatti Veyron was built. It was called the Veyron W18 because it had a W18 engine. However, one thing they realized extremely quickly, with these high number of cylinders engines, first thing is that it overheats very quickly. Okay, and even if it doesn't overheat, all that heat needs to be like extracted out of the engine bay. So on the test cars, quite literally the rear bumpers were melting off because of the heat produced by the engine. And also the W18 only produced 555 horsepower. This was because they glued two VR9 engines together. What are VR9 engines? Well, for this we'll have to understand a W layout of an engine. So unlike the name suggests, it's not three banks with one bank in the middle. It's actually just two banks of cylinders. However, on each bank there is another bank. So it's not just one row of cylinders, there's two rows of cylinders on each bank. So this is how you can make a W18. VR9s were basically Volkswagen taking one VR6 engine, taking another VR6 engine and cutting one VR6 engine in half, so you get a VR3. Now if you glue these two together, it becomes a VR9 engine. Just do this another time and you get a W18. And a VR9 layout is basically, as I just said, it's 4 on each bank. However, one bank will have a cylinder extra. It's a very weird layout, but hey, it works. And also, the advantage of this W18 was that it was extremely short. For example, if you made a V18, it would be extremely long because you have to have 9 cylinders on each bank. In this case, you do still have 9 cylinders on each bank. However, it's organized, right? So that's why you're able to get a shorter engine. On the downside, however, the car is a bit wider. However, the W18 prototype failed as it was just a bit too heavy and it was way too underpowered for the weight of the engine. So it was basically as slow as any supercar of the time. So they scrapped the W18 layout and realized that a W16 might work a bit better in their favor. The W16 also went inside two car bodies. One of the car bodies was a coupe and the other was a sedan, until they finally discovered that they could actually build a two-door hypercar out of this. So that's when the Bugatti Veyron was formed. Of course, while the W16 overheated a bit less quickly than the W18, it was still a massive amount of heat going through the engine bay. So what did they do? Well, they gave the car 10 radiators, an advanced cooling system which literally has more power than a fire hose, and also they had to put 4 turbochargers on it to make sure it produced 1000 horsepower. However, this wasn't the least of their problems while designing the Veyron. The other huge elephant in the room was tires. So far, no road car had to have such tires that they could go 400 kilometers an hour, at the same time also drive to the opera in comfort, because if you're going 400 kilometers an hour, what you'll want is an extremely hard tire. However, if you're just driving down a cobblestone road, you wouldn't want a hard tire. At the same time, suspension also, that applies. If you want to go 400 kilometers an hour, you want to have a hard suspension. However, on day-to-day driving, a hard suspension, well, you'll feel it, right? And also, added to this, the Veyron was pretty heavy. So it was fast, it was heavy, and it also needed to satisfy comfort. Michelin had quite a problem on their hands. They had to test the tires on aircraft tire simulation rigs. Also, you can thank the Bugatti Veyron for dual clutch transmissions. Because it had around 1000 horsepower, no transmission at the time was up to the job of being able to shift gear fast, at the same time also be comfortable, like not shake the whole car while shifting. So that's why they had to employ a special dual clutch transmission, in which instead of one set of selection gears, there are 2 sets of selection gears, and as soon as one gear starts rotating, the 2 other gears, one gear up and one gear down, also slightly rotate. So it's like, suppose you're on second gear, third and fourth gear also will kinda rotate. Why? Because when you're shifting up, fourth gear is already ready for you, and if you're shifting down, Also first gear is already available. So this makes your upshifts and downshifts faster, which is required on a 1000 horsepower car, otherwise it will stunt the acceleration of the car drastically. So after spending billions of research and development on the Bugatti Veyron, it was finally unveiled in 2005. And yes, they did lose a lot of money on one car. For example, they sold them for almost $1.5 million, still quite a bit. However, it was rumored that they spent almost $10 million on one car. However, since it was Volkswagen, they could afford the losses. And another thing, they resurrected a dead company. Now it is time for a little bit of a side story of Bugatti, the brand itself. In 1930, Ettore Bugatti, a guy living in Molsheim, France, decides to start a Grand Prix racing team. The first car he builds is called the Bugatti Type 34B, and this wins a lot of Grand Prix, so he gets a lot of recognition, and after this the Bugatti brand was formed. They used to build road cars at that time also, but they were more like just Grand Prix cars that were slightly detuned for the road and with side mirrors. And they did enjoy quite a good reputation for a few years, but after World War II they just collapsed and they went back into obscurity. And until the 1990s there was no sign of Bugatti. Then in 1991 they had made a car called the EV110. This car had a V12, 4 turbochargers and almost 500 horsepower. This car was rated to be the fastest car of its time alongside the Jaguar XJ220. It went almost 350 kilometers an hour. Problem, it had shoddy build quality, that was one thing, and like the economic repression of the time also hit. So who's buying a random Bugatti? Except Michael Schumacher, of course. He bought a EB110. So since the 1990s revival of the brand also was a huge flop, VW boss Ferdinand Piëch decided to buy the brand and decided to make a car himself. This was how the Bugatti Veyron was born. And now coming back to where we left off, this is why Bugatti revived the brand in 2005. The car critics loved the car, and even the owners were pretty pleased with the car, except that it did cost a lot to maintain. However, Ferdinand Piëch's goal was not only to revive the brand Bugatti and make a 1000 horsepower road car. It was also to beat a few world records in the process. For example, the Bugatti Veyron Super Sport hit almost 437 kilometers an hour down the famous VW test track called the Lera Lyson. But there was one thing. Yes, it did go fast and it did break a record. However, some people noted that the car actually still had its speed limiter on. Now all Bugatti Veyrons, okay, they had this thing where full speed mode wouldn't come on unless you had a special speed key which you inserted inside a special slot in the car. Now for that particular production car that broke the record, they did not insert the speed key and ran it anyway. This means that they could have gone much faster with the speed key. Nobody has attempted the record since because anyway it was broken. While also being extremely fast, the Bugatti Veyron was still very drivable by normal people, and the interiors were very luxurious. Only the finest leather was chosen, and in famous Bugatti style, they had to put a clock in the center of the dashboard. I mean, it's Bugatti, why wouldn't they do that? So now we have to answer an important question. What exactly did the Bugatti Veyron do? Well, we're still talking about it, that's one thing. Another thing is, it cemented the brand legacy of Bugatti once again. It made sure that Bugatti was not underrated or obscure anymore. Also, it broke speed records and redefined what a hypercar was meant to be. It was the only car after the McLaren F1 to breach the 390 km/h barrier. At the same time, you could just, as the brief said, drive it to the opera in relative comfort. And that was the story of Bugatti Veyron, which is a car that has cemented its place in history and is definitely on my list of top 10 cars. And well, this is the end of the episode. Thank you for watching. This is me, Tyre, signing off. If you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe, drop a comment. Thank you.